Welcome to the commentary booth where we watch and you guessed it, commentate on the week that was in movies and TV. I'm your host and play-by-play commentator Jamie Apps, and each week I'm joined by a rotating cast of colour commentators to help you find your next viewing treat. This week I'm joined by a teacher and travel blogger who lists their favourite movie as Top Gun Maverick and favourite TV show as Band of Brothers, very fitting. Welcome to the show, Buddy McClelland.
Thank you. Thank you for having me back.
Of course. How's life treating you?
Life is good. Life is good. Lots of golf. Pretty standard mix between work, golf, and television. So things are good.
You're turning into a true old man teacher.
Oh yeah, yeah. Middle age is starting to suit me really nicely. My hairline is further receding, as is my activity rate. So I can't complain too much.
Fair enough. So this week we're returning to the realm of your favorite TV show as we review Apple TV's Masters of the Air, the latest war drama miniseries from the creators of Band of Brothers and the Pacific. As I mentioned, this is the latest in a line of war dramas from Playtone and Amblin Television, where the previous series had focused on the paratroopers and ground forces in Europe or the Marines in the Pacific. This time around, we're focusing on the Air Force Bombardier Regiments at the heart of the story. This show, Master of the Air, recounts the story of the 100th Bomb Group during World War II and follows bomber crews on dangerous missions to destroy targets inside German-occupied Europe. The show portrays the intensity of war and the dangers that the airmen face, their friendships, and the relationships that develop throughout their time. What did you think of this one before we dive into breaking down characters and bits and pieces from the series?
I loved it. I think that Steven Spielberg and Tom Hanks obviously realized after Band of Brothers that they knew that they were on to a winner in the format that they have. I think of connecting the idea and experiences of people at war with actual characters and people's true stories and experiences. So I think that they've done that really well again. Having a drama entirely based around a bombing group. I think at first when I looked at it, I was thinking, oh, I really wanted it to be good. It looked like it was really high production value from the trailers, but I was a bit nervous going into it that, I mean, bombers generally aren't the most exciting types of plane, and that's coming from a pretty big plane nerd. But the patterns that they fly and the things that they do are pretty standard. But I think the way that they did it and the way that they mixed in the experiences of the pilots at the base, in the air, on the ground in enemy territory, and all of it, it tied together really well, and I really, really enjoyed it.
Yeah, I think I went in with the same reservation of all of the others have been ground battles essentially, so the action was clearly going to happen. Whereas this one, bombers, you're like, where's the action going to come from? And they dissuaded that fear in the first episode on the very first bombing run. I was like, okay, we're right in the midst of some crazy moments straight away.
Yeah, and I think the experiences that these guys would have had, it's just so much more unique than a ground force too. It's a really, really different experience to both the Marines and the paratroopers of the way that they would go from a safe place in England, go up and do what was pretty much the most dangerous possible job that you could do. I think I can't remember the exact statistics of it, but I mean, they were called the Bloody Hundredth for a reason of the amount of people that they would lose. Every time one of them got shot down, 10 people would either be forced to parachute or die, fly those missions, and then come back and land and be able to go out to the pub with your friends at the end of the day and pretend like nothing had happened. It's just, yeah, it's an incredible story, and I'm glad that it got told. Not only, I think it was a book originally, but I'm glad that they brought it to the series. I think even still though, like when it first started, you're right, like the quality of the CGI and the way that they do the dog fighting and those sorts of scenes of what goes on with the flak going off around them and the chaos that would have been happening, I thought was really, really good. But then even still, I got really nervous that after the first couple of episodes, that might be all that they were going to do. And even the quality of that started to wear off. But I think the way that they took it in a turn following Buck and Bucky as they in their friendship and what they had to go through as the two sort of lead characters. I think, yeah, it really took a turn into a bit more of a complex drama than I thought it was going to be.
Yeah, I think picking this particular group definitely was the way to go because you had that initial air raids and things went bad, and then you had like a little bit of that touching back on the Band of Brothers like ground experience when they sort of get captured and stuff like that. But you were mentioning the crazy statistics. I've got here. There was one day in particular, Black Monday, March 6th, 1944. 30 planes set out on a mission. 15 of those were shot down. 150 men were lost, earning them the name the Bloody 100th.
Yes, but it's just the courage to be able to get back up and do that again and just know what you were in for. I think a lot of those stories that come from war and war movies and things like that are people thinking that they're going for an adventure and very quickly realizing that they're not in it. But I think, like we're saying, the way that these guys flew out, but then also got to fly home. Whereas if you think about the 101st Airborne from Band of Brothers, they were kind of just stuck there. And it
Mhm.
was all the time go, go, go. But for these guys, it just that interchangeable, complete and utter chaos and seeing your friends get shot down and then having to go backwards and forwards between it. It just must have taken such a human toll, which I think is something that they show pretty well of people kind of having that shell shock and going back and having to take time out at the flak house, I think it was called,
Yep.
and trying to recover from that. Or I think following the stories where people kind of can I think they talk about going into drinking as a way to cope with it, or people sleeping with people and becoming pretty promiscuous as a way to cope with it, and just how everyone was trying to do whatever they could just to get through it at the time. And yeah, I think the stories are really quite interesting with that.
Yep. And yeah, the fact that this particular bomb group or the American bomb groups flew all their missions during the day as well added that extra bit of like, this is just nuts. Like you're sitting ducks up there majority of the time.
Yeah, I mean they didn't they had what was it 10 different guns on it, whatever it was, but oh man, like a B-17 versus one of the Messerschmitts that would have been going around with them, it just wasn't a fair fight, particularly with the numbers I think that they had. And I didn't even realize at the time that they were going for total air superiority, that they weren't ever going to do D-Day until they had completely shot down or disabled every enemy fighter pilot. So to keep going back and back and back, and I think it's a really good indicator of how hard it was when they were talking about Rosenthal. It was Rosie's Riveters. They had the one plane that finally made it to the 25 flights, and after 25 flights, it was so rare that they would just let you go home.
Mhm.
And just the courage of him even to think that, I think if it was me, I think there was one previously where the guys did go home. If it was me, I wouldn't have wanted to roll the dice any further and risk it myself, I think. But for him, he decided to keep going, and he wanted to stick by his mates so hard that, knowing how dangerous it was and having gone up 25, 30 times, he still kept doing it just because they believed in what they were doing so strongly. So that's just absolute courage.
Yeah. And I think like the fact that they, upon him hitting that 25, they then changed the rules for everyone coming afterwards. I think that probably
Yeah.
played a factor in him being like, no, that's shit. Like if I'm stepping away, I want the next guys to come in and have the same chance I did.
Yeah, you can't move the goalposts.
Yeah. Yeah. Rough. So rough to be like, oh yeah, now
Very,
you've got to do like 35. Like, okay, cool.
very, very rough. But yeah, I thought the way that they broke it up, I thought was quite good. I think at first I thought it was only going to be following the stories, like we said, of Buck and Bucky, the two friends that were flying together. Um, but then that kind of developed into Rosenthal, so the Rosie's Riveters guy, like we just mentioned, became quite a big part of the story. The
Mhm.
Tuskegee Airmen, I thought was a nice inclusion within that. I think his name slipped my mind now. Crosby, the guy that was the navigator that got airsick quite a lot, but then became quite an integral part of planning the bombing runs for the whole group. Um, yeah, I think the way that they developed the characters, I was originally thinking it was just a couple of main ones, but then getting quite complex a bit further on with, we probably ended up with 5 or 6 key stories that we were following. Even the ground crews, I think, were really well covered. I think it just feels like the team that made it took their time to think about all the different people that were incorporated in these missions, not just the pilots.
Yep.
And really make sure that everybody was included. And I don't think many people that would have had family or something as a part of that would have been too upset by the way it was portrayed.
Yeah, like especially like the tail gunners, they're never going to get much credit for the missions they did. It was always going to be the pilots first and foremost, then the bomb guy, and then probably the navigators, and then all the guys just manning the guns were just like, they're just here because they are necessary.
Oh, mate, but like imagine the belly gunner, like the guy that's looking down, and you just got glass in front of you,
Yep.
seeing all the flak shooting up at you. That's terrifying. To be stuck inside of that. And I think one of the guys did get stuck inside of it.
Mhm.
Yeah, absolutely terrifying. And it's crazy that they did it. I mean, it must have been so stressful. I think not only for them, but I think just for the people at home, because obviously it transitions as they fly more and more missions. Obviously, they get more and more risk of being shot down till eventually where most of them do get shot down. But then that transition into being a prisoner of war, and having the experiences of the Germans knowing so much about you, which I didn't realize was something that they did. Like they would talk about their families and talk about their baseball teams, and they knew quite a lot. I'm not sure if you
Yeah.
would have seen it yet. I know we were originally planning to sort of chat about it a little bit earlier, but it allowed a little bit of time for the actual Bloody Hundredth documentary to come out
Yep.
on Apple TV. Have you seen that one?
Yep.
And I thought that was brilliant to be able to then link it all back into the actual people and have the actual documentary told parallel or just after having watched it. I thought it was a really, really cool way to be able to sort of finish it all off.
Yeah, I think that was a really cool idea to like, let's now go back and focus on like the actual people and their stories without the sort of dramatization. I thought that was a really nice touch. I did love learning that like the planes, they weren't steel, like they were just
Yeah.
essentially
Aluminium.
aluminium cans. It's like, yeah, no
Yeah,
wonder
just
they were
flying
just
around in
getting
a Coke can full of
shredded.
bombs.
Yep. Yeah, flak goes off, it just shreds through them like paper. It's like, oh my god.
Yeah, but they seem to stay up, which is probably a lot more than you can say for Boeing at the moment. So give me one of them.
Yeah, Boeing loses a door and the whole plane's ready to come down.
Oh, mate. If it's
These
Boeing, I'm
things
not going.
these things were what, flying with one engine out of 4 and just still
Yeah.
flying along like nothing's wrong.
Yeah, half a tail, one wing, and they're still going. The Boeing's just, the current Boeing's, nah. Couldn't pay me.
Yeah, no thank you.
Sir, are you a trading card collector or a fan of Australian pro wrestling? If so, you're not going to want to miss out on the limited edition Australian wrestling cards. Each set includes 50 packs of 10 cards, including some of the country's top wrestling talents like Robbie Eagles, Shane Haste, Madison Eagles, Hartley Jackson, and they have Shaza McKenzie listed, although she is not a favorite. The velocities, and a lot more. There's wrestlers, referees, announcers, commentators that are featured, giving you a full appreciation of the Australian independent scene. The cards sold out a lot faster because cards are hot right now, I'll tell you. But you can order your Australian wrestling cards now at Pario Magazine. That's PARIO magazine.com.au/AUSWRES cards. Follow Australian Wrestling Cards on social media at AusResCards for updates. Join the hundreds of fans who have already discovered the excitement of Australian wrestling cards.
So we mentioned sort of the characters, pretty stacked cast with Austin Butler, Callum Turner, Barry Keogh is very briefly in the series.
Very briefly.
Um, of the major characters, did you have a favorite?
I think I can never get the two mixed up. I really did like Crosby because I thought his experience of being airsick and not knowing what it was like, and then having all that pressure placed on him to plan the D-Day missions and everything, and not being able to having to stay awake. Sorry, not being able to sleep for so long. I thought that was quite cool. But I kind of felt myself. I wanted to identify the most. I can't remember if it's Buck or Bucky, but the one that gets shot down, Major Egan, I think it was.
Yeah, that's Bucky.
Bucky, sorry, it's good nicknames. But yeah, I think with him, just that feeling of he was away and then his friend got shot down, and the first thing he wanted to do was get back up in the air and sort of go for a revenge flight. Yeah, I think they did that quite well, and I feel like I would have gone just as crazy in a prisoner of war camp as he did. But I thought Austin Butler was quite good. My only criticism of it, and I don't know if you felt like it, would probably be that it felt like Elvis was flying a bomber.
Yep.
He is still stuck. I mean, he's a great actor, but he is still stuck as Elvis. Like, he was lucky, I think, that it fit this role a little bit.
Yeah. I think he spent so much time with like a dialect coach to get the Elvis voice and inflection down that now he's like stuck. He's like having a hard time getting back out of it into Austin Butler again.
Yeah, you could definitely feel it. I mean, it was still good, but you could definitely feel Elvis in the plane.
Yeah, I feel like it wore off the longer the series went. I think like that first episode, he was very Elvis, like in the bar with their partners and stuff. I was like, he's just Elvis here, and then he slowly went back to being Austin or Buck.
Yeah, see, I haven't watched the new June, where I hope that at least that's given him something so different that he can't possibly clash the two. But I think to his defense, at least this one is in the time period where Elvis probably would have done a movie similar to this, so it's not that far out of the realm of possibility that it could be him getting stuck.
Well, Elvis was in the army at this time, wasn't he? World War II?
I think he was further along, wasn't he? He was Vietnam.
Ah, maybe it was. I remember him being in the army.
But I think Elvis did do movies about doing stuff like that. So
Yep.
I don't know. It's not too far. Him in a bomber jacket with the hair like that, it just gave me so much Elvis vibes. And then he started talking, and I was like, yeah, he's still
Jeez, Elvis is here.
yeah.
I did love the dichotomy between Buck and Bucky as well, though. Like, Buck was very much like the realist, calm, collected, analytical. And then you just had Bucky just being like super optimistic, kind of just gambling on hell, stuff it. We're probably going to get shot down anyway, so why not just go for it?
Yeah, it was interesting that. Like, I think they were like that too. Like, he was pretty happy to go for some pretty crazy things. But then that feeling I think they all must have had to have held with them was, I think they mentioned at the end where they thought they were going to be the only two B-17 pilots left. If everybody else got shot down, they thought the last two would be them. And I feel like that's probably the only way that you could go into that as an actual person, and the way that the characters did, thinking, well, everyone else is going to get shot down, not me. And you'd have to keep hanging on to that until eventually the plane was on fire and you had to jump out of it. So yeah, it was good. I liked those two together, and I liked the changing relationship that they had. I think they were very tight best friends at the start, and you could see how their different opinions and styles of being leaders and being in the war impacted that friendship at the end. I think when they're in the POW camp, you can really see them getting strained. One wanting to escape all the other time, and the other trying to be calculated to get out and trying to have that happy medium. And then I think the real way that they always try and push these Band of Brothers series and the stories, obviously they probably get changed a little bit and made to look a bit more heroic here and there, I guess. But then seeing when they eventually do go for that escape attempt, that everyone else is running away and Bucky puts himself in the way of the guards and basically death to try and let his mates get away while he stays and suffers a bit longer.
Yep. We mentioned Harry Crosby as well. I think for me, he was my favorite character of this series. I just feel like he had the most sort of character growth. Like you mentioned, he went from, I think one of my first notes in like episode 1 or 2 was like, Crosby is just useless. Why do we have him here? Because he couldn't do anything right. But then by the end of it, he's the one basically, like you said, spending multiple days not sleeping to plan the D-Day mission and get everything in order. And then he falls asleep and misses the whole thing.
Yeah, I mean, I can't make it to like my holiday house that I'm going to in the school holidays without using Google Maps. I cannot imagine the idea of having to be in a plane that's being shot at, that you think you're going to die, with all the guns going off around you and everyone's screaming, and you've got to plan exactly how to get there, turn the right time, drop the bombs at the right time, and you get travel sick.
Yeah. Yeah, you're
fair
wanting to
play to him.
chuck
That was
your
a
guts up
tough
the whole
job.
time.
Yeah, I get annoyed if I miss a turn and there's like a little lady in my phone telling me when to go. So that would have been a tough job. But I think you're right. He did have a big development. I felt like he almost had a character growth and then a character decline at the end as well, which I thought was interesting. That it almost got so much for him that I think he had an affair at one point. Then he came back and planned all these missions and became quite a strong character. When I think at the start, you're right, he was quite weak. But by the end, he was really running things and controlling things. But yeah, it was interesting to watch them kind of come and go through the stress of war.
And yet, like, just the amount of work that the navigators had to do, like, it wasn't just like, oh, just look out the window and look for some landmarks and work out where we are. Like, we're that high up, we can't see anything. There's no oxygen up here. We're wearing oxygen masks whilst I'm trying to throw up. And it's all just like,
Yeah,
here's a map. The pilot's telling me we're going this direction this fast. Work it out.
yeah. Or make a note every time something happens at the same time too. Not even just time to concentrate. Like every time someone went down, they'd have to make a note, and they got debriefed at the end of it. Like it was.
Oh, those debriefings as well.
It's a
Jesus.
Yeah, and I think that was a really good way that they did they showed the emotional impact of the time when I think they really made a big point of showing the debriefs and what it was like at the start when there was quite a lot of planes. And then I think you said, what was it, the Black Monday or whatever it was, where they went and flew out on all those missions and not many came back. They really did well to show such an empty, hollow feeling room with no more people being debriefed in it. Yeah, it would have been really, really tough.
And then, yeah, like even in that debrief, all the people on the plane are like, I don't know. Like, I just saw them go down. I don't know when, where, how many people got out. It was just chaos. There were planes going down everywhere. So we don't know what happened to half of these people.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that's a credit to the show. The way that they've done it makes you really emotionally invest, and I think it makes you feel really sort of emotionally empty, like they would have when not many people come back. So yeah, it's a credit to the way they've made it.
On that idea of sort of emotions and theming, I wrote down a few words that just sort of really stuck out to me. Terror, devastation, tragic, in especially those really heavy episodes where just plane after plane's going down. Pretty gruesome in some moments as well. I wasn't expecting quite this level of gore. And then infuriating was another one. Haunting and just dread. Like just so much dread. Every time they went up into the air, they just had to assume someone's hit up. Someone's not coming back.
Something's telling me they're not putting that on the recruitment posters.
No.
Yeah, I mean, I've got to agree. Like, I think so, but then I also think, from having watched the whole series, that the words that would spring to my mind would again be courage, commitment, and probably mateship for us. Like, they really, and they always come back to that. The thing you're going up there for isn't to necessarily bomb a submarine factory; it's to be there for the people that are with you. So yeah, to face all that stuff that you've said, but then to keep going and doing your job, I think is just probably courage for me is number one.
Yeah. Yeah, like I guess every time they were going up, it wasn't so much what's the overall goals for this mission. It's keep my 10 mates that are on this plane with me. Let's just get each other back.
Yeah, exactly.
And like
Exactly.
you see that when like there's guys that the flak goes off, pierces through the side of the plane, takes out one guy's like whole legs, and everyone's like, okay, tourniquet, get him stabilized, let's get him back. And they just forget everything else, just get this guy back. And it's like, and he's still trying to do his job. He's still just like manning the guns. You're like, you have no legs.
Yeah. I think that really gets highlighted too when they go from doing purposeful bombing runs to then having to be basically the bait to get the rest of the planes up in the air so that they can have the people at the Tuskegee Airmen come in with the Mustangs and shoot down the rest of the Luftwaffe. So I think that really gets pushed and pushed and pushed to the point where they're not even flying missions for missions anymore.
Mhm.
They're literally only trying to get out there, bait a few people and get home safe. So to even go up and know that you're the bait, that's just wild.
I would have liked to see the Tuskegee Airmen sort of highlighted a bit more. It felt like they were kind of there and then they were shot down. It was like, oh, that didn't really highlight them much. Maybe a future season.
Yeah, I thought the link to the obviously the racial tension that still would have been there in the POW camps, I thought it was interesting. At first, I got really worried that it might have been something they were doing. It almost felt like it could have been just a ticker box idea of like, oh, there were African American people, let's get them in there so we can say we did that.
Mhm.
But then they actually really did follow the stories into the POW camp, I think. So I think the focus more for the Tuskegee Airmen was about the experience after being shot down, not as much the experience in the air. But then when I watched the Bloody Hundredth documentary, I thought there was really nice features in there interviewing the Tuskegee Airmen and talking about what life was like for them. And then even in the air, they were mentioning that they had the red dots on the tails, I think, or they had the red tails on the planes, and that the bombers didn't actually know that they were African Americans at that time, but they knew that they liked having the guys with the red plane tails come and help them. And then seeing the racism fade away in what would have been a likely quite a racist time period, to have that racism fade away a bit and people just be people together to survive in a POW camp, I think was important. But then again, I think frustrating that they still manage to have a little bit of racism lingering around, even in a situation like that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the documentary did a great job of highlighting just how pivotal the Mustangs and the Tuskegee Airmen were to sort of shifting the balance of the war for the bombing groups and the Air Force.
Yeah, and I mean, and to do it, I think they touch on it, but to do it in an environment that, I mean, like we're saying about the guys that were flying in the 100th Bomb Group, that they would fly, come back, go to the pub, I don't know, go out and meet girls or whatever and feel quite respected. I think to do all that and then come back to the countries that you're trying to fight for and defend and to be disrespected and then to still have to go and show that exact same level of courage, if not more, if you're getting shot down, like I think to be able to do that is just incredible that they were so committed and so strong in the face of not only a war but the racial tension that they would have had.
Another thing I noted as well. What did you think of? Did you watch the intro every time, or what did you think of the intro for each episode?
I watched it the first time, but then it was so long winded that I just wanted to get to the episode. What did I miss?
Yeah, it was kind of the same every time, but I just thought it was really cool that for me, it echoed the Band of Brothers intro so well with sort of the the individuals highlighted and then like fading into the background of the action sequences in the intro. Like such a cool, and like the slow panning motion as well. Like this is just the Band of Brothers intro with new people, new action sequences in the background. I thought that was well done to highlight that these are all linked together.
Yeah, and I think they know, like obviously they know the Band of Brothers was a big hit. The Pacific, if I'm honest, it felt like a bit of a letdown. I don't think the characters I was as invested in. I know it was a different style of war in Japan and they went through some pretty heavy stuff, but I feel like they managed to get through all the heavy stuff in these other shows but help you connect a bit more. I couldn't connect as well in the Pacific. And I think at least here they've taken the time to maybe go back, it feels like, and reflect on what they did well the first time, maybe what wasn't quite as good the second time, and try and put all the good bits into the third time. Yeah, and the build up obviously is part of that. I think it's really good. I love the grandness of, I think a big thing of airmen at those times, they were flying with hundreds and hundreds of planes up at the same time. Even just seeing them all take off at the same time, I think would have just been unbelievable. And I think they did really well to capture that. I never really found myself laughing at the CGI or anything like that, where I thought, oh, it looks so fake, or yeah, it felt realistic enough to keep me engaged in it, which I thought was good. And it did a good job to capture the chaos and the grandness, I think, that would have been there prior to the chaos.
Yep. Yeah, like some of those scenes where there's just bomber after bomber after bomber, and then there's flak going off, then there's hundreds of Luftwaffe flying around. It's like, holy cow, these missions were insane.
Yeah. I just don't know how you wouldn't have crashed into each other and known who was who. And yeah, I guess you stay in the formation and hope for the best while everything goes on around you.
Especially once the Tuskegee Airmen and the Mustangs come in, like there's even more fighter pilots zooming around, and old mates on the guns are just shooting at planes, hoping that they're shooting at the right ones, I guess.
Yeah.
I guess that's
Yeah.
where the red tail
And I
come
mean,
in handy.
yeah. And these guys are like, more often than not, weren't pilots. Like they were just guys that were in college at the time that decided that's what they wanted to try and do. And then all of a sudden they're going for this. Yeah, it was pretty wild. Me at 21 was not one of these guys at 21.
Yeah, maybe a gunner. I'm definitely not immediately learning how to fly a giant plane. And like even from the very first episode when they're landing in, was it Norway or something? And it's like they're landing basically on ice, and Buck is just like, yeah,
Yeah, in
sweet,
the crosswind.
let's land this perfectly fine. It's like, Jesus, I've had worse landings in commercial planes.
Yeah. Yeah, it gave me Queenstown vibes, that one.
Yeah, recently coming back from Queensland, I had the worst landing I've ever experienced in Sydney.
Oh, I reckon I could do my very, very first flight was, I don't know if you remember Ansett.
Mhm.
So like an Australian budget airline, it's kind of the original Jetstar.
So budget,
we
they
did
went
a
broke.
trip up to the Gold Coast. So budget they went broke. Yeah, yeah. I should have known when they said put your arm out and flap really hard. But we flew Ansett up to the Gold Coast as a kid, like most people do, to go and do the theme parks. But I didn't realize how scary it was at the time because I was only a kid and I thought it always did this. But we landed and we had to do a touch and go
Oh,
to go back up. So we kind of went down, got super close to the ground, and then just hit the power. We went back up and around again. And I thought as a kid, wow, we're getting some more flight time. How cool. Didn't realize how terrified my parents must have been. So,
yeah, old mates
yeah,
just suddenly
that
pulled
one
the
was a
pin on
bad
that
one.
landing.
Had that one, and then I was coming back Air Vanuatu from Vanuatu one time, and the crosswind was so strong in Sydney that the wings, as we were coming in, were almost touching the ground. And the people around me, I realized again, had my face pressed at the window. I think I was 14 at this point, but I think as a kid you just feel kind of fearless. But me now, I'd be absolutely shitting myself. Me then, wow, this is cool. But as I turned around, everyone else was in the crash position. It was that bad.
Jesus.
So the whole thing with their heads forwards, and we landed, and everyone gave a round of applause to the pilot. So yeah, there's some sketchy ones out there still.
Yeah, my recent one, we came in, we hit the ground, bounced, and then
Ooh.
tilted on the bounce, and then
Ooh.
slammed back down. I was like, okay, that was easily the worst landing I've ever experienced.
Yeah, I'll walk home, thank you.
Yeah, I'm sitting next to my brother who was hungover as all hell. Look at him, and we're both just like, ugh. I'm glad I wasn't hungover.
I'm telling you,
It was probably
mowing.
way worse for him.
Yeah, I've had some experiences with that too, but we won't go into that.
What else did I have written down here? I did like the fact that, obviously, not great that they got shot down, but once on the ground, they had to like confront what they were doing on these missions as well. Like they got an up close personal look at the aftermath of bombing missions, and I thought the scene where they're walking through the town and you hear like the mother screaming that her kids were in the collapsed building, that was like one of those really heart-wrenching sort of eerie moments where it's like, oh wow, okay, now they're having to actually, similar to what like the Band of Brothers guys did, up close personal fighting, you had to experience what you were doing.
Yeah, well, I think that's probably a unique experience for bomber pilots and for fighter pilots in general. I think is that they're so far removed from the things that they're hitting, unless they're actually shot down. So I think to be able to experience that for them, or having to have experience of that for them, would have been a massive reality check. I mean, it'd be really easy to be up there, I think, and feel like you were doing the right thing, but then to go down there and see it, especially once they knew they were hitting targets that were near civilian houses. And I know that I didn't realize that you're watching this show that they had top secret bomb sites that were supposed to be able to hit a pickle barrel, I think they said, from 30,000 feet.
Yep.
But in reality, that's never going to happen. But then having to see what they were actually doing to people, I think would have been massively conflicting. And I don't know how you felt, but for me, this show made me feel that conflict for them, that you could see the damage that you were doing, but then you also got an idea, I think, when it was Rosenthal walked through part of one of the concentration camps, that it's almost a situation of greater good versus terrible, terrible evil. Like, yeah, super, super hard decisions that they had to make. But you can't do nothing when something like that was happening as well. So, yeah, it would have been heartbreaking for them. I think the reaction of the German people was probably pretty fair. To then go and want to murder the pilots that murdered your children is pretty understandable. And again, I think that speaks to the idea that pretty much everyone that was a part of this story was given some screen time in this story.
Yeah, like from the pilots to the other people in the plane to even the German citizens also having a moment. The French resistance also had a moment as well. I thought that was a really that like 2-episode arc, that was a really cool arc as well.
Yeah, definitely. And them having to choose what they were going to do, whether they wanted to be prisoners of war or try and make it back. But if you try to make it back and you get caught, you get killed. So quick, make a decision.
Yeah, big gamble.
Which I think was good. And the role of women in war, I think, is really well represented in here. I think that can probably be overlooked a lot, that some really, really brave women did some really, really scary things, including the French women, I think it was, in the resistance, and the MI6 or spy agent that I think Harry Crosby falls in love with, and some of the sketchy things that they were having to do to have their own impact, I think, again, is mentioned pretty well.
Yep. We mentioned sort of the flight scenes and the CG. I read that they filmed a lot of that using the volume, which is the thing that they've used for a lot of Star Wars, like The Mandalorian, and that where it's not green screen, it's like an actual giant sort of projection screen, so they can project stuff on it. This was probably the best use of it that I've seen. Sometimes in The Mandalorian, you can see like where the screen for the volume stops and where the green screen of the floor begins. But this one, because it was all aerial based, I thought that was really well done. And like that allowed the actors to react to the flak naturally, because they could like look out the window of the replica planes and see the flak like going off on the screen. It wasn't like, look outside, there's a big green screen, we're going to put some bombs over there.
Yeah, I think there was never a moment for me where I looked at it and I thought, oh yeah, as if, or I never got pulled out of the story. And I think, speaking to that, like, I watched it with my wife every week, and she would quite often remind me, Friday, it's Masters of the Air, let's go watch it. And for her, like,
That's a
war
good sign.
shows and war documentaries and movies are definitely not her thing. We're more of a Downton Abbey household. But I think for her getting pulled into the drama, but also for her being engaged in aerial combat scenes is not something she would normally do. So I think the way that they've done the CG obviously doesn't pull you out of it, and it was realistic enough to keep you really invested in the story and pretty stressed, to be honest, while you watch it, because you're pretty worried about what might happen to the characters that you start to fall in love with.
And I think that the sense of like claustrophobia also comes through in the screen too, because a lot of the time they were filming in replica B-17s, so the actors would actually be in the plane cockpit for up to 7 hours at a time, because it was so hard to get them inside the plane and then suspend it within the set from the volume. So they'd be put in there in the morning and then they'd just be in there all day.
I mean, that's pretty fair to what would have happened to the actual people.
And the last trivia note I had was, this has an enormous cast. Across the 9 episodes, there are over 300 speaking parts, which is very rare for a show like this. Like Band of Brothers, I don't think would have been anywhere near that. You kind of just had that one core group of guys and they carried the majority of it. Whereas this one, because it was switching between different planes, and then you had the ground crews and then the air crews, and then you had the Tuskegee Airmen, and then you had the guys in the prison camp, like it was all over the place. So there was so many actors getting prominent portrayals in this show.
Yeah, I think if they're going to do everybody's story, then they're going to have a big cast. But I thought all of them did quite well. There's no one in my mind. Normally, if I watch any sort of a show, I might think about a role or a character that I didn't really enjoy the portrayal of. And if the only bad thing I have to say was that Austin Butler felt a little Elvis-y, I think it was pretty well done by all people. I really didn't have a problem with any of the characters.
Yeah, I can't complain about the performances at all. I thought they were all really well done. But yeah, Austin Butler and what's his name? The other guy. Callum Turner as Buck and Bucky, respectively. Fantastic. Anthony Boyle as Harry Crosby. Brilliant. You mentioned Belle Powell as Alexandra Westgate, the MI6 spy. Her interactions with Crosby were fantastic. Barry Keogh, I thought he was awesome. Very different role for him
While he was there.
compared to Saltburn.
Yeah, I still haven't seen it, but I'm terrified now because of what I've heard.
It's a movie. It's very intense.
Yeah.
It's definitely one that you
I think
I
did
watch it with Anne and like film your facial reactions to some of those scenes. Just brilliant.
I don't know if I want to.
I'm going to tell Anne.
I did notice. Yeah, go for it. I did notice Isabel May, the girlfriend, was one of the characters from 1883. So I really enjoyed seeing the crossovers there from some of my other favorite shows, like Yellowstone.
Yep.
But yeah, there was a good cast. There was solid actors. Like it wasn't. You could feel the budget.
Oh, 100%. The Apple money.
That Apple money is good money.
Yep. I'm shocked that HBO didn't jump in on this one, given they did the previous, like Band of Brothers in the Pacific. It was weird that Apple then picked this up.
Again, I reckon the Apple money, surely it would have been something that anyone would have wanted to pick up, but who could pay the most and make the best thing. I think the names that you have attached to it and the success it's previously had, it didn't matter what they were going to put it on. It was always going to be well watched, whether it was good or not. I think it's nice that it's good as well. But again, I think every time I've been on talking to you, I feel like I'm always saying the exact same thing, that the things that they put on Apple TV, more often than not, if you think about sort of Ted Lasso and things of that like that, there's not much on Apple TV, but the things that are on it are definitely worth watching.
There's a good selection on Apple TV now. Like if you haven't had Apple TV before and sign up now, you have so much stuff to watch at this point.
I couldn't believe there's still people I work with that I'm telling them to watch Ted Lasso. Like, you need to see this. Like, it makes you happier every single time you watch it.
Yeah. So
it's good.
If you sign up for Apple TV now, you've got this show, Masters of the Air, Ted Lasso, The Morning Show or Morning Wars. What else have you got? Severance. There's the new show Manhunt that just started about the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. I'm 3 episodes into that. That's brilliant as well.
Some of their movies.
Killers of the Flower Moon, Coda.
Yeah, it's plenty.
If you wanted
it just
to sign
feels
up
like
now,
they went for the opposite. Yeah, it feels like they went to the opposite platform or the opposite game plan that Netflix. I feel like Netflix for a while was let's throw a little bit of money at everything and see what we can come up with. But I feel like Apple are just like, let's throw all of our money at these cool things and make good stuff.
Yep. Yeah, I think the one like big flop that Apple has had recently has been that Argyle movie. It performed pretty poorly critically, but I think with its cast as well, I think once it hits Apple TV, I think that's when it'll really find an audience, just because of the amount of people in that movie. So in terms of a rating for Masters of the Air, what would you give this series out of 5?
If we're looking, I still think Band of Brothers is top for me. I think it comes out ahead. And again, I think they were probably restricted a little bit with what they could do with something that's focused in just being in the air for a lot of the time, but they did it very, very well. If I was saying that Band of Brothers being my favorite is a 5, I would give this probably a 4.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I gave Masters of the Air a 4, and yeah, in terms of my ranking, it's Band of Brothers. I think it's going to be very hard to ever top that because it's like pretty much one of the greatest TV shows ever made. And then Masters of the Air came in with a 4, and then yeah, Pacific is definitely third in the rankings for the Playtone uh, war dramas.
I just think, like I said at the start, I think they just found a really great formula of doing something that is cinematically engaging, that it's got enough action, but then they link it to the real stories of real people that were there. Obviously, as we're getting further along, those people are slowly, unfortunately, dying away. Um, but I think it really, in my opinion, ticks some good boxes of not only being entertaining, but also being educational. There was things in there that me being a warplane movie nerd still was learning,
Mhm.
but also making sure that the stories of these people that did these incredible things and sometimes horrific things, but having their stories being told in a way that's respectful, but also something that you want to watch and that you want to share, I think is ticking some really important boxes.
Yeah, it's not just a total mood killer the entire time. Like you actually want to continue with the story and get to the next moment throughout it. And
Yeah.
I think that all comes back to like Tom Hanks and Spielberg's like love for this period in time, and they're obviously quite knowledgeable and passionate about telling these stories. They're not just going in and telling this story because it's going to be popular. Like they're going in there because they really care about conveying these moments and stories of the individuals, not the overall war drama.
Yeah, and I think that linking them back at the end is something that I always, having done Band of Brothers and knowing what happens at the end when you see Captain Winter and whoever else sort of coming out, that knowing that you're going to get to see the actual people that the characters are based on, and really put a face to the name is a really highlight for me at the end of it.
And like you said, with so many of them sort of passing away now, I think that's going to make it even harder to do these sort of shows. Like I guess they're kind of tapped out on what they can potentially do for World War II at this point. Do they go back and do sort of World War One stuff? Do they then move forward to sort of the Vietnam, Korean War period?
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if they do. I mean, if you've done Army, you've done kind of Marines is a little bit Navy. You've done Air Force, but I wouldn't be surprised if they tried to focus in on a more Navy-based aquatic version of something. I know that they did another good Apple TV movie was a Greyhound with Tom Hanks.
Mhm. Yep.
But it wouldn't surprise me if they went for something along those lines. I think when you watch the Bloody Hundredth documentary, that they've got a pretty good way of getting the books and the previously filmed content and editing that into something that feels more current. Um, so it wouldn't surprise me if they stick to the time period that they know works for them. Um, I think once you start to get further in the time periods with wars, when you start to talk about Vietnam and beyond those times, I don't want to say that World War II is like a glorified thing, but I think that the nature of how people felt about those wars
Mhm.
definitely changed as time went on. And they obviously don't get as much glorification and as much romance in them as I think a World War II or previous war movie or war series does. So I think they'd be reluctant to do something further along when you're talking Vietnam, Afghanistan, Iraq, that sort of thing. I think they're going to try and stick to the thing that they know and do what works. Don't change it.
Yeah. Yeah, like you get into the Vietnam and Korean wars, you sort of start to get into the more controversial war
Yeah, very
periods.
political.
Um, but I think, yeah, like you said, they've done a great job of finding stories that haven't sort of been overexploited in World War II. Like they're finding fresh new things. Like every time I watch one of these series, I'm learning new aspects of World War II, which I think makes them even more intriguing.
Yeah, 100%. Love it. Give me more, Tom. Stephen.
Alrighty, so that's Masters of the Air. Thank you everyone for listening to the commentary booth. If you enjoyed the show, please remember to rate, review, and subscribe on podcast services and on YouTube. You can follow Buddy on Instagram at a.b_CSEE. And you can follow me on social media at Jamie Apps Media and at Pario Magazine.
Thank you.
The Commentary Booth is a fan-funded production of Jamie Apps Media. You can support the podcast alongside our magazine, Pario Magazine, on Patreon at patreon.com/Jamie Apps Media. The following people supported at the publisher level or higher, and you cannot fathom how incredibly appreciative we are for their support.